this tutorial, we're going to model this sci-fi prop. I've got two reference images here, which are very similar in design. I've also got orthographic views, which I'm going to import as image reference inside of 3DCoat, directly inside the 3D viewport to help guide the modeling process. So let's get started. Now here I am inside of the modeling workspace, and I have an Explorer window here which shows those two reference images which I showed previously, and also the orthographic images which I mentioned earlier. The reason I've got 4 images here is because I want to show you various ways in which you can get your reference images inside of 3DCoat. Now, in the previous glasses tutorial, I showed you how to bring the reference inside of the color palette down here, and also how to bring in a 3D reference from the paint room. This tutorial moves forwards in that it shows us how to bring in these images directly as reference inside of the 3D modeling viewport. So to start with, let's take this side view here. I'm going to click on this image and I'm going to drag it over from the Explorer window into the 3D modeling viewport. Once I let go, you'll see 3DCoat asks me what I want to do with this image, and I want to add this image as a reference image. So I'll choose that option, and it will bring that image inside of my 3D viewport. You'll notice this little pop-up window here. It's asking me now what I want to do with this image inside of the 3D viewport. So I'm going to click on this little X here to snap to my X-axis so I can see this straight on. I'm going to make sure as well that my icon here for orthographic view is on. Now, when I brought this image in, you can see this large green frame around it. This is an editing frame. It allows me to change things like the scale and position of my reference. For now, I'm going to leave it exactly where it is and say close guides. This has placed this reference image on the X-axis inside of my 3D viewport. Let's have another look now at a different way of importing an image and use one of the other images that we saw. In this top menu here, you can see we have this little picture icon here. If I click on this icon, you can see I get a reference dialog box. Now, if you roll over and off this dialog box, eventually it will disappear. So in order for it to remain on the screen, let's do that again, you have to click on this little pin icon here. This will leave it on the screen for us to reference. So previously, I've already chosen my reference for the X-axis. Now I want to choose one for the Z-axis. So to do this, I'm going to click on Reference Image for Z-axis. For the Z-axis, I want to choose this front image. So I'm going to choose Front and say Open. Now at first, you'll think nothing's happened because we are still in the X-axis. But if I rotate my view around now, or click on the Z-axis, you can see that it's been updated with my front image. Again, I'm going to say close guides. Now I'm going to select for the Y-axis, but this time I'm going to use a different method. I'm going to click Edit Image Placement, and you will see that I now get this dialog box again. This is dependent on which of these axes I'm looking down. So if I move to my Y-axis, so I'm looking directly down, and choose for this axis, I'm going to hit this button here called Choose, and I'm going to choose the top view, and then it places that image in this viewport for the Y-axis. And let me rotate around again, and you can see as I rotate around, it's trying to determine which axis I'm in and show the appropriate reference image for that axis, whether it's X, Y, or Z. I'm going to click this option here, which says Show All Planes. And now I can see all the planes at once. If I want to transform all the planes, let's say for example, I want to scale them all uniformly in each axis, I will choose this option here, Transform All. Let's now move over to our x-axis and look at these opacity settings down here. I'm going to click Transform All, and I'm going to start to change the opacity of these reference images. Now, the overall opacity here affects the inside opacity. So let's put this to 1 in this value box here, and then change the opacity. You can see the inside opacity isn't affected anymore because this is 100%. If I change this down to roughly 30% and now change this inside opacity, you can see I can go higher than 30% but no lower than 30%. It won't go below the 30% or the 0.3. If I move this one down even further, I can still increase, but it won't go down below 10% or 1.8% in this case. So these are quite useful tools here just to allow you to see the model rather than be overwhelmed by the brightness of the actual reference image itself. Let's move our view around and you can see all the reference images have been updated with the settings that I placed in here. Now if I want to scale these, you can see this little widget on the side here allows me to do that. I've got Transform All selected, and if I click and drag, it will transform all of my reference images in one go. If I want to move the position of my reference image, I can do that with these arrows. If I want to scale my reference images, then I can do that with these scaling handles on the side. Now I don't want to use scale because my reference images are all set to a defined size already, so scaling them would not be of any benefit to me here. The green frame here tells you that you're working in an edit mode for the reference images. You can use this frame by clicking on it to position as well. However, I tend to think of this as more of an indication to change the reference images. If I say close guides, the ability to change this is now stopped. I can still move around and see my reference images, but transforming and editing is now closed until I press Edit Image Placement. So here we've seen a few different ways in which we can bring in our reference material to help with our modeling process. If at any time this small window here disappears, which it sometimes does do, you will have to go back to this little icon here, click, pull down the reference and pin again, and then you've got access. You can't dock this in any place. It has to be a floating window, which is why I tend to just leave it in a free space when I'm setting up my reference images. Another feature when editing your reference is a small dot that's in the center of the editing frame. When I move the small pivot point, you'll notice that the arrows change. This means that I can scale or transform my images based on a specific point. So for example, if I wanted to scale from this section here, making sure my Transform All is on, I can now scale from this point, and then I can change that reference point and scale from this point outwards. If you wish to reset, simply choose Reset from the Image References dialog box. This will reset. However, you must make sure that you're resetting each of these individually, as the Transform All does not include each specific view when resetting. So simply go to the axis that you need to reset and hit the reset again and again. And this will return all reference images to the correct size and scale. The Show Hide and Hide All options are dependent on the view or axis that you are looking down at any one time. So here, for example, I have my reference images showed in all axes. If I choose the side view here and say Show Hide, then the side view is hidden, but the other two, as you can see if I rotate around, are visible. If I go to the Z axis and say Show Hide, this hides the image in the Z axis. and the top view remains unchanged. So if I want to bring those back, I have to go to that axis and then click the button again, which will toggle the visibility of that particular axis. Snapping to the x-axis, I can toggle back to visibility the side view. So I've gone ahead now and placed my reference images inside the 3D modeling workspace, and I've also just dropped the opacity of those images as well, just so I can see the modeling a little bit clearer. And I've also dropped the opacity of the images just so I can see my modeling progress a little clearer. Now you may have noticed on the right side here that I've got some curves that I've generated as well to help guide the modeling process. If you're unfamiliar with curves inside of 3DCoat, then there is this playlist on the 3DCoat YouTube channel, and this video here will show you how to generate those curves. And let's have a look at these curves in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I've just named these randomly. So this one's called center line, and it's basically a center line for this main top part of the prop. The other one here is the end cap. So this is essentially for the back part, and it's just an ellipse. And then we have this handle that I've generated, and I've used this to trace around the handle. As you can see, the one at the top is a profile. This is where we will start our modeling process. So you'll notice on this profile, I've gone ahead and I've filleted the ends of here just to try to match the reference images that seem to have this bevel. And this will work with the center line curve that I generated also. So let's drop our first polygons down. So I'm going to use the polyhedron tool here. Within the tool options, you'll notice it's asking me for a profile curve and an axis curve. Now I've called my profile curve nozzle curve, and the axis curve it's referring to here, I've given mine a name of center line. So to do this, as you can see, currently they are both unassigned. I'm going to use this little pick icon here, click on the curve that I want to use as a profile, in this case nozzle curve. Then I'll do the same for the axis curve and pick what I called the center line. And immediately you can see it updates and previews a mesh. But let's look at a few options here first. So here you can see I've got number of moving. If you increase this and decrease, you get a much more faceted low poly version, and then increasing you get a more smoother result, but a lot more polygons. You have these options here as well for placing caps on either end. I don't want those, so I'm going to remove those. And also you can change the number of spans being generated. I'm happy with this result, but if we just zoom in here, you can see where on my original curve, and I talked about those fillets that I generated, 3DCoat has tried its best to generate enough polygons to simulate that fillet that I generated on the curve. It's a little bit too much for what we need, but it's just doing its best to try to copy the curve profile that I generated. Now there's one last thing on here that's interesting. The profile that we can see here and the use of the center line can be changed as well on the fly. So I'm going to select my nozzle curve and I'm going to choose my curves from the E panel, and then toolbar here I'm going to choose move. So because my nozzle curve or profile curve is selected, it assumes I want to move this, which is correct. So now if I start to move this around, you can see on the fly it's going to change the preview accordingly. And this helps just to refine and get that curve exactly where you need it. So for example here, where our reference images, we can just make sure that we can move this into exactly the correct position. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, and we don't have to go in and redraw the position or move the curve independently. We can do it all in the same view with the tools previewing at the same time. So I'm happy with this, and I'm just going to hit apply mesh. Before you do that, always make sure that you've got symmetry inactive. In other words, disable the symmetry. With that done, I'm going to hit apply mesh. I'll hit escape, And you can see we've got our geometry created. Okay, so with the geometry of the nozzle created, I've gone ahead and just changed the name of that layer to nozzle. And if I toggle the visibility of that layer, you can see it turns on and off that geometry that we previously created. So let's focus now on this main section, and I'm going to remove the other references out of the way. I will turn on my edit image placement and use the show hide whilst in the view, whilst in the axis of the view plane. So I don't want the side one and I don't want the top one either. So I'm just going to hide those and then say close guides. So if I move around now and look at the Z axis, you can see the front view. I'm going to create a new layer and call this one main, and then I'm going to hide the nozzle geometry just for now. So here I need to create this shape here, like this rounded box shape. So I'm going to use my points to polys tool initially and place my first few points. Now the polygon that I've just created, if I turn the nozzle back on, 3DCoat didn't know where to place that, so it just placed it probably around about where I last clicked as a guide, which wasn't the correct place. I need it obviously towards the beginning of this nozzle here. So I need to select this, so I'll choose select and transform, make sure my polygons are selected here, and I will just click on that polygon to give me the gizmo, and then I will move that one back on the Z axis, rotate my view around and just line it up with this edge here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be roughly in the correct place. So at this point I will go back to my points to polys tool here. If you remember with the on plane function, I can right mouse click on a polygon to define that polygon as the plane in which I want to continue working on. If I do this one with this newly generated polygon here and right click, it now defines this surface normal as the plane. So I'm going to choose quads here. So with the quads tool selected, I'm going to choose here under the extrusion method, direct. So again, let's repeat that. So roll over the edge, click the edge, and now I'm going to start to move and extrude the same length of polygon out until I reach roughly the center point here. Let's escape that tool and go the other way down this way. So all I need to do now is just mainly just clean these edges up. The only reason I'm going around here is because I don't want to go all the way around this model and then all the way down here. I can simply just mirror this section here that I've made. Let me just get rid of the nozzle there. I can just mirror this over from one side to the other and then down below, and then I will get the complete shape. So let's do that now. So here I'm going to make sure my symmetry is on in the X axis, and with main selected here, I'm going to do a mesh virtual mirror, enable symmetry, and you can see it places that mirrored object ready for me to commit should I want it. So at the moment I'm not quite happy with the placement, so I'm going to go back over to my move tool with points selected, and I'm just going to snap these two together there to give me a complete archway all the way around. And whilst I'm here, I think my edge over here needs to be moved over a little bit that way. And then once I'm happy with that, and I will just then say apply symmetry to current layer. Once I've done that, I will turn off the virtual mirror, and then I've got my piece ready. So let's bring the nozzle back, and you can see that has been generated. So one last thing to do here, let's turn that nozzle off again. What I want to do now is I want to mirror this section, this whole section that I've just completed, into the bottom half here. So let's again choose my mesh virtual mirror, and in this case what I'm going to do is change from X to Y. So I'm going to be mirroring in the Y now, and again I just need to move these points. Once that's done, I've got that shape that I need. I will say mesh, apply again, and then turn off the virtual mirror. Now, although we've got the basic shape in and we've mirrored that geometry nicely across and then down, you'll notice that our geometry doesn't quite match our reference at the bottom part here. So we need to move these polys down. So in order to do that, what I will do here is I'll use my marquee selection with vertex selected, and I will just drag a marquee around those points, and then I will just hit the transform tool here and then move these down closer to the reference image here. So at this point I've got the basic shape. It's reaching the bottom of the actual main part of this prop, but you can see here that I've got a problem on the end points here. It's a much tighter curve than over the top part, so I need to correct that part now. So now I've got a much better shape there, and it's much more in keeping with the reference image. So now I've generated that shape, I'll just bring back the nozzle shape here and just check how that looks. I'm going to need now the side reference again. Then I'll close the guides down again, just so I've got that reference. And from now on, all I need to do is select an edge, double click to select the whole loop. And then I'm going to use my select and transform tool here and say commit extrusion. And then use this arrow to pull that geometry back roughly to that position there on my reference. And then what I'll do is, just in the same way that I have this nice edge on the front part of this main part of the prop, I'm going to spin the viewport round to the back. I'm going to commit another extrusion with those still selected, and then I'm just going to move those edges inwards like so. The design of the back of the prop is different than the front, so this is just a cosmetic thing at the moment. So it doesn't need to be accurate because this will change later on. So with that being done, I will hit Escape to drop the tool, Alt D to drop the selection, and there we have the basics of our prop design created for the top half. In the next video, we will continue to model the end cap and handle of our Sci Fi Prop. See you next time.